We, in theory, have coffee and pastries coming, so we'll see if and when it doth show up. But thank you all for coming to the talk today. My name is Josiah Marino. I'm the other professor, the junior political science professor, along with my colleague, Dr. Sean Williams. So with the panel discussion today, to give just a little bit of the background, this came out of a book reading group that many of us participated in. We read a book called The Soul of a Christian University. And what the book helped us think about, again, is what's unique about the Christian university, because we call it the Christian University. So why do we call it that? What's different, what's unique about the Christian university? And as we've all been living through and experiencing, we're going through perhaps a unique time in contemporary American politics. So what this panel is about is trying to kind of put together those two ideas and seeing what relations we can identify between them. What is the Christian university, and what particular role, if any, does it play in contemporary American politics? So I have a total of 5 illustrious colleagues that will be exploring these ideas together. And I see this as an ongoing conversation. I don't know if we're going to solve any national level questions today, but maybe we will. And so this will be an ongoing conversation. And I look forward to having people participate in future conversations. So what we'll do is we'll just go alphabetically, or maybe we'll just go straight down the line. People are sitting so nicely. So we have Dr. Thomas Bell and remind me of your department.
Sport Management.
Sport Management. We have Mr. Joshua Dutheridge from English as a second language. We have Dr. Carrie Ruiz from Sociology, Dr. Jonathan May, also from Sociology, and then last, certainly not least, Dr. Sean Williams from Political Science. So what we're going to do is we're going to give each panelist about 4 or 5 minutes to kind of share his or her ideas, and then we'll go down the line. So that'll take roughly about half an hour. And then for the latter half of our conversation today, what I'd like to do is open it up to questions from the audience and also questions from the other panel members to other panel members. So if I could turn the floor over to Dr. Bell, encourage you to take the podium if you like, and to share your thoughts and ideas.
Okay. Well, to me, when it comes to Christianity and education and politics, really it comes down to the latter two are secondary to the Christianity. In other words, we are Christians who do certain things. We are educators. If we're involved in politics, the politics is secondary compared to our Christianity. And so everything that we do needs to be tainted or saturated in the love of Christ, but also biblical teachings. And so it's not, Christianity isn't something that we do on the side that is superfluous to what we do. Like, I'm an educator. For me, education is a venue to share the love of Christ, to share the teachings of Christ. Secondary is the educational part here. So I want to make sure that my students know the gospel, the good news, the thing that actually changes people for eternity. Something that isn't going to be just for this world. As we know, the world is secularism, so to speak, and it's going to corrupt us into thinking differently about Christianity or about Christ, which is going to lead us on to good works. So for us, I look at education as just a venue of which my job is to share Christ and His love with other people. So my duty as a teacher, I think first is evangelism, second is discipleship, and third is education in my field. Now, and the reason for that is, consider this: if I'm an educator and I create disciple an individual who becomes the greatest scholar in their field in the history of mankind, but they die and go to hell, what have I done to contribute to, done for anything? I have done nothing. So whatever I do, I have to do it unto Christ. And whatever I do, it has to contribute to developing that individual into being drawn to Christ or being discipled and growing closer to Christ. So, we had Stephen Hawking just recently die, who is avowed atheist. Okay, so the guy has some great theories. What's he doing right now? What has he contributed? What has all that education done for him? Nothing. He's in a place of torment right now. So, so for me, so as a teacher, that's my first thing. So how do I do this? One, I have to remain humble. So I can't look at myself as a PhD and all that. I have to look at that as we are equals. I simply have been around a lot longer than you have and have more of an education. And so I want to approach this as humble. So God doesn't look at me and say, hey, he's a PhD. Oh, look, he's only a student. Or she's only a student. God doesn't do that. God looks at us as equal. And so I need to look at you and others around us in the same way. Two, I need to pray for my students' salvation. So this is a spiritual battle. The world is tugging at each one of our hearts and drawing us to or away from Christ. And so I need to be praying and fighting in this spiritual battle for my students. Two, I need to look for opportunities to share Christ with my students. So how do I do that? So prior to, on the first day of class, one thing I did was I asked all of my students, I said, what's one question, two questions that you have about Christianity that you would like answered, but it's never been answered? And so now before every class I do a 5-minute devotion answering one of their questions, because for me, I refused to believe Christianity until it was proven to me scientifically. Statistically, it had to be proven to me because I was 31. I was a scientist. I was finishing my PhD at the time. So it had to be proven to me. So I don't want any one of my students to get out of my class and not hear the gospel and not have their answers or their questions answered. I want them to be answered. So like I said, Christian education, I think, is just a venue to teach the proper view of God and where He should be in our lives. And so remember, whatever we do, word or deed, it doesn't matter. We're supposed to do it unto Christ. And so that's going to be very, very critical. And what was Jesus' last command? To go into all the world and teaching people to obey what He's commanded him, right? So He didn't say go and be a great management professor. No, He said go and teach people to obey the commands that I've given you. That's the number one command that has been given to us. So we have to, I think as educators, we have to integrate Christianity into our teaching as best as we can without compromising the education. We cannot be slack in this part and just teach Christianity. We have to teach our discipline, and so if you're going to be a physicist, be a great physicist. But don't forget Christ and who He is and that He created physics. And then, now here's the part that is humbling to me, is the world, the world and sin has corrupted my thinking. So if you're sitting back here now, you're going, oh, I don't agree with this. Consider this. You were born with a sin nature. I was born with a sin nature. The way we think is corrupted by sin. We don't think right. And so we need to get back to the basics. And how do we do that? Going back to the Scriptures and finding out what the Scripture says. And so I had a student ask me a question today. Why do Christians, why are they always rich, but it started with a poor person named Jesus? Answer, because of our sin. How can a Christian who's a multimillionaire look at someone who's starving and do nothing? The Scripture says his Christianity is worth nothing. He's not a believer. So we have to do that. So I think I think we have a great opportunity here to share Christ in our classrooms and integrate it into our educational system. But again, we cannot neglect the academic part, but don't forget Jesus, because He is why we are here. So anyways, thank you.
And next we have Mr. Josh Dethridge. Can you share your ideas with us? Thank you so much. Do you need a copy of
All right, well, welcome. I'm so glad to be here with you guys. I just want to commend Dr. Bell for what he had to say, and really what he said provides, I think, the spiritual foundation upon which my contribution to this is built. And that is, as a Christian university in contemporary America, providing an environment that both engages and supports international students. I think it's only appropriate that I have my international students here with us today. And I think this is a really important topic because international students coming to America is not something that's new. In fact, over the past few decades, as I pointed out in my paper, there's been an explosion in the number of international students coming to study in the United States. One of the sources that I viewed in the paper said that over half of all of international students who have gone to another country to study have come to the United States. That's, for me at least, overwhelming. I know that the numbers are high, but that's almost beyond comprehension. The number of international students today in the United States is still fairly large, but there has been a turnaround in the number of students coming to the United States. And I believe a big reason for that is trends in politics and in rhetoric that's being said and used in the United States now. What I believe and propose the Christian university, the role that the Christian university can play in supporting international students is that because of the spiritual foundation that we have, that Dr. Bell was talking about, that we create an environment that shows love and acceptance. And not just love and acceptance that can be shown by a regular secular university, but a love and acceptance that is founded in the love of Jesus Christ, the experience that we as academic professors, administrators, teachers, staff, etc., we have experienced the love of Jesus Christ. And that is something that in turn we can share with our international students. Some practical ways in which to do that, I think, are simple. Just creating an institutional environment where there's an intentionality of professors, of administrators, of staff to engage and interact with international students one-on-one. I think one of the reasons why there's a breakdown a lot of times in interactions that develop, relationships that develop between international students and domestic students or domestic professors is simply that a lot of those students and professors simply don't know how best to interact with international students. And I think working to create as an institution an environment that is fruitful in creating such relationships, providing an opportunity to educate faculty, staff, administrators, simply on how to interact well with international students. All of the research out there, pretty much all of it that I've looked at, that I've discussed with Mr. Hooker, states that students, international students, who develop meaningful relationships during their time of study abroad have a more enjoyable experience, learn better, and look back on the international exchange program or their international study more positively. And I think from a spiritual perspective, that allows us an opportunity to actively show the love of Jesus Christ through those relationships. So certainly we are a liberal arts university. We do want to challenge the minds of our students, but we also don't want to neglect the spiritual aspect as well. And I think that's one of the defining characteristics of Christian higher education, is that we look at our students holistically. We don't just see them as minds that need to be shaped. We see them as spiritual beings in need of Christ. So I think that's an important aspect that we can't afford to overlook as a Christian university.
Next we have Dr. Carrie Ruiz.
Well, before I begin my discussion on the role of the Christian university in the political and social climate that we're in, I would like to speak for just a little bit about the maybe the elephant in the room, so to speak, and that is the increased polarization that we are experiencing in our society right now, centered on a lot of political and social issues. And so if we think about a Christian college, one of the things that is associated with a Christian education is it's also liberal arts, right? And so a liberal arts education usually comes with some expectations. One, that you're going to be engaging in the classroom, trying to tackle and wrap your mind around some tough ideas, sometimes some controversial ideas. Hopefully this will lead to some critical thinking. It will lead to some dissection of ideas, a mutual exchange of ideas. And sometimes that doesn't mesh well, oftentimes in the political climate that we're in, that has become increasingly polarized, that has become increasingly a lot more animosity towards some of these ideas. And this is really centered on both things. You have, in 2010, Glenn Beck in his show warned churchgoers that if you heard the term social justice in your parish or in your church, then you needed to leave immediately because that was code for Marxist ideology, and that was not something that you needed to participate in. And so this quote by Beck really exemplified a growing attitude toward a lot of Christians and a lot of voters that had a lot of negative ideas around higher education. And so you have this voting bloc of oftentimes the Christian right that is centered on a very particular issues, right? And issues that sometimes have to be addressed in the classroom. On the other end of the spectrum, though, you have college classrooms that become increasingly hostile sometimes towards students who perhaps don't say the right thing or think the right thing, professors and perhaps other students in the classroom who have very particular ideas on maybe on the other end of the spectrum surrounding certain issues. And so there's a marginalization of students in classes when they begin to profess certain attitudes or ideas, or at least in the attempt to unpack certain things, right, that come about. I think this is exemplified in particular in the growth of popularity by a psychology professor out of Toronto, Canada, by the name of Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's really kind of taking on a lot of these issues and tackling a lot of these issues around identity politics, political correctness. And we see an increasing popularity of his ideas. His YouTube channel gets a lot of views. He's making a lot of money right now. And I think that this really speaks to the isolation sometimes that students feel in the classroom if they're not in lockstep with certain attitudes. So in thinking about some of these issues and this increased polarization that we're experiencing politically, socially, this has infiltrated, I think, college campuses. The one way that the Christian college stands to really help is simply by bridging the gap. That in our Christian identity, in our liberal arts identity, we can begin to bridge the gap where the polarization aspect that centers on an either-or dynamic could be flipped to include what would be considered a both-and principle. That maybe we begin to, one, bridge the gap between these two extremes through dialogue, open and respectful dialogue, through right doctrine, and building relationships among our students. And hopefully in doing so, we could yield more Christianity in the classroom and not less, and more open dialogue and not less, as people begin to speak to one another. I think another thing too that's important to remember as we're speaking in class and as Christians is this quote. I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard it. In essentials, unity. In non-essentials, liberty. And in all things, charity. Right? So if it's essential, then yeah, we agree with it. You know, as Christians, we agree with the doctrines of the Apostles' Creed. Right? If it's not, if it's a political issue, perhaps then we can have a space to talk about this and unpack some of this. But in all things, we need to remember the idea of Christian love. Thank you.
Dr. Mayer?
Well, I just wanted to kind of add with what Carrie was saying. I feel like what I've been sort of going through and sort of as hammering out these ideas is really similar to what you're looking at, this idea of polarization. One of the things that I've been sort of trying to wrap my mind around is sort of why have Christians gotten so involved in this extremely hostile environment, political environment. And the things that I'm sort of trying to address in the paper that I wrote, and I'll get into some of them here in a minute, is the fact that I think one of the things that we've done as Christians is, rather than coming back and saying, okay, so as Christians, what does my theology, how I believe about the world, what the Bible says about the world, affect the beliefs that I have, my political views, and even more importantly than that, how I act towards those views. I think it's less, as Dr. Ruiz was saying, it's oftentimes less about whether I hold this position or that position. And I think we have not been behaving as Christians in how we act towards those positions, how we act towards the world in the positions that we hold. And what I've sort of set out is what I think is one of the roles that the Christian university can play in this sort of polarizing political climate is to step back and say, okay, so let's talk about our Christian faith. Let's talk about the basic assumptions that we approach the world with, and let's see, how do those assumptions play out in the making of policy, or how do they play out in how we should approach social action or political action? What should we be involved in, and how should we be involved with it? And a couple of things came to mind. I think the first one is that the Christians, I believe, have some voice because we have a different perspective than what the rest of the secular world tends to have in a lot of different ways. I think in one way, our view of human nature is very different than the one that other people approach the world with. The Christian view of human nature holds that we are both born in the image of God, but we are also sinful. We are also born under sin, right? All of us, right? And when we look at how it is that we seem to frame political discussions today, we're also often framing these political discussions as, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy, this person's hurting this person, right? This is the good people and these are the bad people. And it's like, wait a second, what does our faith tell us? Our faith tells us that all of us are sinful. All of us are prone to our own selfishness, right? All of us are usually working out of our selfishness